Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant, where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watch in the WWE Network. Today I'm talking all about WrestleMania 13 as seen on the network on the road to WrestleMania. As all of you know, I don't want to keep on repeating myself here if you've been listening to every video up to this point, but I'll be talking about every WrestleMania 1 through 30 with the exception of, let's say it together, 17, 19, 20, and 21 already up here on the channel. I find it hard to believe I'm already halfway through, almost halfway through. Or, there's 30 WrestleManias. This is number 13. We're almost halfway through here. But WrestleMania 13, while I watched it, not a bad WrestleMania, looking back on the results, and this isn't like WrestleManias 1 through 8 where I watched it back in September. I watched these just recently, and some of these matches I don't even remember much about, and I watched them a week or two ago, which kind of goes to say, which kind of goes to show how little these matches mean or how good they were or whatever. But like I said, it was not a bad WrestleMania. Kicking off the show was a four-way tag team elimination match for the WWF tag team titles, pitting the Headbangers, the New Blackjacks, the Godwins, and Doug Furnas and Phil LaFone, who I've talked about here in the past and on the show, who I am absolutely not familiar with whatsoever. So a match involving a lot of tag teams that I was not familiar with from the mid-90s. I did recognize, of course, the New Blackjacks. That, of course, involved Blackjack Bradshaw, who was JBL, which was like the funniest thing to watch. I think I took a screen cap of it, and I put it on my Twitter when I was watching it a couple weeks ago. But I didn't even know that he was a part of the New Blackjacks, of course, the APA, but I had no idea that JBL, before the APA, was doing the New Blackjacks. That was news to me, so that was funny to see him in the all-cowboy getup. That was pretty comical. But the match itself was good. I mean, for a four-way elimination match, to get 10 minutes seemed a little bit weird, so there was a lot of rushed eliminations there. It was a good match, but I don't really remember much about it aside from it being decent. Like, if it was bad, then I wouldn't have remembered it. But it wasn't, I'm sorry, it was not for the WWF Tag Team titles. It was a #1 contenders match for the Tag Team Championship. So it was a fine matchup. The Headbangers ended up emerging victorious, so really nothing noteworthy there. A good way to kick off the show, but not the hottest way they can kick off the show. Another title match here for the Intercontinental Championship. Rocky Maivia, a.k.a. The Rock, defeating the Sultan to retain that Intercontinental Championship. His father, who was not at ringside with him, he would come out afterwards to aid him in his assault on Bob Backlund and the Iron Sheik afterwards. So the match itself was actually pretty good. A nice Rocky showcase in his first WrestleMania match, his WrestleMania debut. So this WrestleMania is noteworthy, being newsworthy for being the WrestleMania debut of the Great One. So it was a fine match. Really wasn't anything too great. I mean, it was, like I said, the match itself was nothing like memorable, but with it being Rock's WrestleMania debut, it was newsworthy in that respect. So it was nice to see him kind of getting some nice moves in there, have a nice showcase, have a nice showing against the Sultan, and it was also really cool to see him with his father after the matchup, taking up against the Bob Backlund and the Iron Sheik, kind of a double team to save him from the heels, hit with Rocky's father saving him from Backlund and Sheik. So a good showing there. I liked more so the after stuff, the post-match stuff with Maivia, with both Maivias, Rock and his father. But the match itself, I mean, was pretty standard. It was you would get that at any other WrestleMania. But he was a good Intercontinental Champion, though. Rock was a great Intercontinental Champion, as we would see the following year as well. He would also be defending that championship at WrestleMania, but I'll talk about it when we get to WrestleMania 14. So up next, Triple H, a.k.a. Hunter Hearst Helmsley at that time, taking on Goldust. Now this is, I mean, you think back, this is 1997. In 2015, this matchup would be mocked upon. But Hunter Hearst Helmsley did indeed face Goldust at WrestleMania. Chyna in Triple H's corner. I mean, in Hunter's corner, I'll guess. He was not Triple H by this point, so I'll call him Hunter. Chyna was in Hunter's corner. Marlena was in Goldust's corner. And Goldust here was the babyface, which was interesting because he spent a majority of his time in WWE, WWF, whatever, as a heel, and a great heel at that. The match itself was pretty good. I mean, Goldust, as great of a gimmick as it was, he does not get the credit that he usually deserves for being as good of a worker as he is and was and is. I mean, even today, he's still a great worker, and it wasn't until just recently, when he came back to the company in late 2013, that people really started to recognize him as an excellent in-ring worker. But that was apparent even watching this match against Hunter. They worked a really good matchup, a nice little story behind it between the two, and the two with Marlena being at ringside for Goldust, and she was kind of the counterpart to Chyna in Hunter's corner. So that had that nice little dynamic to it. The Goldust gimmick worked better as a heel back then, but still, like I said, those little out of the ordinary to see it in that element, but it was still a really good match, though. I enjoyed it. For Triple H, this was not his WrestleMania debut. I talked about that in my WrestleMania 12 review when he faced the Ultimate Warrior. but this would be his first win at WrestleMania in decisive fashion against Goldust. So a nice matchup there. Up next for the WWF Tag Team titles, the other one was a number 1 contenders match. This matchup actually was for the WWF Tag Team titles. It pitted Owen Hart and the British Bulldog against Mankind and Vader, who are a pretty fun tag team. I don't remember much about them. I mean, when I watched this WrestleMania, it was like, oh, they actually tag team together. I didn't remember anything about that. But still, I thought they made a really good tag team given their similar gimmicks and their relationship with Paul Bearer. That was pretty nice. But the match itself was a really good matchup. Owen Hart, like I've said time and time again, anything he was involved in was awesome. This was really no exception. I really enjoyed the tag team with British Bulldog, another very underrated performer who also belongs in the WWE Hall of Fame as well as Vader. Mick Foley's already in there. But still, a really nice tag team matchup. I just really wasn't happy that it ended in a double DQ, or a double countout, excuse me. Like I said, I mean, I was fine with it in the early WrestleManias, 1 through 9, whatever it was. Because it was pretty par for the course back in the 80s and the 90s and the early 90s for matches to end in such a fashion constantly, in a DQ, a countout, whatever. By the late 90s, it kind of strayed away from that on WrestleMania 13 of all things. We're still in the early portion, so it wasn't like the worst thing in the world, but yeah, I wasn't really a fan of the finish, but because the match was so good, I give it a thumbs up because I really, really enjoyed this matchup, and everyone involved played their parts well and was great. So that was that. Up next, the submission match, the iconic matchup, the one and only iconic matchup from this WrestleMania, pitting Bret Hart against Stone Cold Steve Austin, with the debuting Ken Shamrock, formerly from the UFC, as the special guest referee. So like I said, this is the only match that this WrestleMania will ever be known for. I thought the rest of this WrestleMania was pretty good, but this was easily the best matchup on the show, and easily the greatest matchup. The one thing that you will remember from WrestleMania 13, from watching it back on the network or at the time or whatever. An excellent match from start to finish. And this is coming from someone that also saw their Survivor Series matchup when I was reviewing all the Survivor Series. A couple of months ago, back in November, I watched their matchup from Survivor Series 96, which Bret Hart also won. So this was even a better match than that. I mean, the I Quit aspect, it was not an I Quit match, it was submission. So you didn't have the referee, constantly putting the microphone to both guys' mouths like they did with Bret Hart, coincidentally enough, and Bob Backlund the year prior, which was a good matchup, but submission matches and I Quit matches are like night and day. I think I Quit matches can be a little bit more obnoxious for the reasons I just stated, because they're constantly asking the wrestlers, do you want to quit? No. Do you want to quit? No. Do you want to quit? No. You know what I mean? It gets to be a little annoying after a while. But in the submission match, it's a little bit different, and it was something new. It was fresh. People didn't really tap out most of the time, and someone brought to my attention a couple of months ago that it really wasn't a thing to tap out. You would say I quit. Like submission was not invented with Ken Shamrock, but the tap out was when he came. I don't know if it necessarily was, but it was around that time that people started to tap out more often to the ankle lock as applied by Ken Shamrock. But still, I thought this was an excellent matchup. Stone Cold Steve Austin would not tap out. He would be knocked out. The iconic blood all over his face. And the best part about this matchup was that people were not fully booing Bret Hart. It was not like they were 100% Stone Cold's corner and they're 100% against Bret Hart. There was a lot of boos for Bret Hart, but not a significant amount. But what I did really like, and this is obviously the story going in, what I did really like was how the commentators, Jim Ross specifically, acknowledged that, saying that Austin was getting really, really popular with the audience. Bret Hart, all of his recent complaining and his bitching and his moaning was kind of turning the crowd against him. So the build to this matchup was awesome. The execution of the match was awesome, and of course the aftermath would be awesome as well, seeing how Stone Cold Steve Austin went on to become one of the biggest stars, if not the biggest star, in our business. So an amazing match all the way around. The finish, I love the double turn, the way it was executed, everything about it. Stone Cold Steve Austin will tell you the exact same thing. One of his favorite matches of his career, if you listen to his podcast, he talks about it all the time. So great stuff there. Really, really enjoyed it. And he was made out to look very, very strong in defeat, even though Stone Cold did not win. By not tapping out and an iconic, crimson mask, so to speak. Everything about this matchup I really, really enjoyed. And I also found out, too, and I'll probably be writing an article about this at some point, but what I did find out at some point, or, later on, after watching this pay-per-view, was that Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin 3, or 2 at WrestleMania, whatever way you want to look at it, was scheduled for WrestleMania 14 the following year. However, due to Bret Hart and the Montreal Screwjob and, everything that happened that year in 97, or later this year in '97. They did not do that matchup, but they ended up doing Shawn Michaels versus Stone Cold instead. But the whole premise behind that matchup and doing it again was that Stone Cold could finally get his win over Bret Hart. And I don't think he ever did. After Bret Hart beat him at WrestleMania, maybe he beat him on Raw, I'm not sure. But in terms of big-time matches on a pay-per-view, Stone Cold Steve Austin never got his win back over Bret Hart. So it's kind of one of those what-if scenarios when looking back on history. Up next is Chicago's street fight between the returning Legion of Doom, Chicago Zone, against the Nation of Domination represented by Farouk, Crush, and Savio Vega. And it was a kind of a 3-on-2 tag team match. Or it wasn't really a tag team match because it was more of a street fight. But I loved this matchup. This whole WrestleMania, I mean, it was not a great and memorable WrestleMania, but it was made great by the crowd, and that was kind of evident in the previous matchup between Hart and Stone Cold. But the Chicago crowd, even today, is an awesome wrestling crowd, an awesome wrestling audience, and that was definitely the case here. I mean, they loved the Legion of Doom. When they came out with, this was not with Sunny. I think with Sunny they came out the following year when they returned again. But they were white hot for the Legion of Doom, and this was a crazy matchup. I mean, just a complete train wreck in the best sense of the word. I mean, I know I use that sometimes to explain a clusterfuck, but a train wreck in terms of just so much going on and in a fun way. Not in terms of, you can't really focus on one thing. You weren't really supposed to. But they made the most of the no DQ aspect of this matchup, incorporating a few weapons at ringside, and the Legion of Doom ultimately picking up the hometown victory. So I really enjoyed that. An awesome tag team match, and a great way to kind of go into the main event between The Undertaker and Psycho Sid. So like I said, main event, Taker, Psycho Sid for the WWF Championship. The match itself, I mean, it got over 20 minutes, which was very surprising to me. I thought they would cut their time short a little bit. Probably would have enjoyed the tag team match go a little longer. The Chicago Street Fight go a little longer, and this matchup get cut a little bit. I know that sounds weird, and usually I'm advocating for more time for the WrestleMania main events. But truth be told, Undertaker and Psycho Sid did not have the greatest match in the main event of the show. The whole booking of the WWE Championship angle, and I was talking to John, at JohnKnapp17 on Twitter. We were talking about this in a phone call a couple days ago, and that WrestleMania 13 was, I believe in what he said, the lowest in terms of buy rates, the lowest buy rate in WrestleMania history. You look up and down this card, it's not really that surprising. I mean, of course, Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin was a hidden gem, but everything else was kind of, you would see that in any other pay-per-view. Like, nothing on this card kind of screams WrestleMania to me, and this was well beyond the point that WrestleMania was established as the premier pay-per-view. So to present the card they did was pretty sloppy on their part. I mean, it was not a terrible WrestleMania, but the way that it was executed was not in WrestleMania fashion. Taker versus Psycho Sid is not a WrestleMania main event. And getting back to what I was saying before, the whole WWE title picture at this time, I believe it was, I don't remember the exact title changes in history and whatever else, but I think Michaels beat Psycho Sid for the belt at Royal Rumble a couple months prior. He had to vacate the belt due to an quote-unquote injury. He didn't want a job to Bret Hart at WrestleMania, so he gave up the title and was written off TV, and they gave that spot to Austin instead to face Bret Hart at WrestleMania. Bret Hart wasn't even the championship matchup, but yeah, Shawn Michaels lost the WWF Championship after beating Psycho Sid for the Royal Rumble, or defending against him, I don't know. And then he vacated it. A Fatal 4-Way match was held at the February pay-per-view to determine a new champion. Bret Hart won that matchup, but then he would lose the championship 2 weeks later on Raw to Psycho Sid after interference from, I think it was Taker or Stone Cold or whoever. They were all involved, and it became this huge clusterfuck of a match. But, yeah, and then so when Undertaker won the championship here, I mean, it was a big moment. His first time holding that championship in nearly, I don't know what it was. He won his first championship in 91, I think it was, and this is 97, so many years since he last held the WWE Championship. So it was a nice moment, but the championship changed hands so many times in the course of like 2 months that it didn't really mean too much. And the fact, like, oh, it was a great match, so that made up for it. The match itself really wasn't that great. I mean, it was better than most of Taker's matches up to that point. The match he had last year with Diesel was, I mean, I would say that match was probably better because Psycho Sid was never the greatest in-ring worker. Had a nice impact on the business, but he was never the greatest in-ring worker. So the match itself, it was solid. I don't want to say it was terrible, but it was not WrestleMania main event caliber. But it was what it was. Undertaker came out victorious, the new WWF champion. A nice moment to close off the show with, but the match itself was really nothing too special. And that's what I can kind of sum up this WrestleMania with in a nutshell. This WrestleMania was not great. It was good. I can't even call it good. I want to kind of just say decent. It was not a bad WrestleMania by any means. There were far worse WrestleManias before this one. I mean, the buy rate was the worst in WWE WWF history. The buy rate was the worst. But in terms of a card and the execution, I mean, it was not great, and it wasn't terrible either. It was just kind of in the middle. And like I said before, the only real match worth watching from this show on the network is Bret Hart versus Stone Cold. And if you haven't seen it yet, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. You can watch the WrestleMania from start to finish. It's not the longest WrestleMania. Most WrestleManias, I think up until WrestleMania 16 or WrestleMania 2000, were only 3 hours or under 3 hours in length. So it's not the longest WrestleMania by any stretch of the imagination. But it's fine for what it was. But if anything, go out of your way to see Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. An amazing matchup in every sense. Definitely go out of your way to watch that matchup from this show. So with that being said, folks, always appreciate you guys listening, watching, whatever. My WrestleMania reviews next time on, this is going up on Saturday, so tomorrow on Sunday, my WrestleMania 14 review will be up. So make sure to check back for that review. But in the meantime, in between time, you guys can find me on Twitter at WrestleRant. Make sure to find me on Facebook at Graham GSM Matthews. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. Thanks once again for listening, guys, and I'll catch you guys on Sunday.